Greetings. I'm sitting here in the middle of my own personal harvest, and I was just getting some labels put on my jars, and I was reminded that I had some requests for some information about what I'm exactly are in all these jars and what my own personal harvest entails. It's appropriate, I thought, tomorrow being Lammas, that I post this video today. I hope you can hear me over the blast of my fan. We have no air conditioning here in our home, and it's quite hot today, and I cannot function without my fan. Anyway, I just want to do a quick video and talk to you a little bit about my own food preserving techniques, why I do them, how I do them, what they entail. I think this will be the first of probably 2 videos, maybe 3, that I'll do on this subject, because just like the middle of the year, we have 3 harvests in the middle of the year. I have several spaced throughout my year as well. Of course, I do can all year to an extent, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. But mostly, we do have here, I have 2 big main harvests. 2 big main harvests of my summer, what we call my summer garden. My summer garden is coming to, some of my plants are winding down now. We start our summer garden very early in the year here in California, and we're now in the heat of getting into the heat of real big, hottest time of the year, so our plants are kind of pooping out a little bit. So we're replacing them. We're going to take them out, and some of them, and be replacing them with a winter garden in another couple months. We'll be planting some more crops for winter. But in the meantime, I'll have one more final harvest of the remaining plants from my summer. It's not all about canning with me, but it's a big part of it, and I'll tell you why. Of course, growing up, my mother and grandmother, of course, canned things from the garden. When I was a small child, there was no such thing, I don't think, as frozen vegetables. So if any kind of preservation from the garden had to be done canning, either in a water bath can or pressure canning. What I do is only water bath canning, but I don't do it like my mother. I'm a little different in a few ways. Number one, my mother canned the vegetables. Like tomatoes. She got their tomato crop and she peeled and canned the tomatoes, or she canned the beans, or she, whatever. It was the individual crop. I don't do that. I can't see him going to the trouble of canning tomatoes only to have to go to the trouble of taking those canned tomatoes and making them into something to eat. So I tend to go right to the final product, with a few exceptions, and I make, rather than canning tomatoes, I can salsa, I can tomato sauce, or pizza sauce, etc. Okay? I can chilies, I can hot sauce, make hot sauce, I make enchilada sauce. This is my point. So I make my own fast food ahead of time. Yeah. And not everything goes in cans. I also have things that I freeze, but I'll talk to you about that another time probably. Anyway, I just have right here representative of this last several weeks of canning. But before I get into that, I want to say another difference that I have between my methods and my mother's method is I'm, being very lazy. I'm going to admit it. Who has time for that? And if you've ever done water bath canning, particularly, you know you have to dig out this giant kettle and fill it with tons of water, and it's very cumbersome, hard to handle. Takes forever for the water come to boil. That is necessary if you want to can something like the sauerkraut here. This is sauerkraut, and this is in a quart jar because I need a big pot, lots of water. Okay, so for something like that, I will follow the recommended, get my canner down, etc. But when I do that, remember, this by the way, if you saw my video, one of my videos, I think before I did maybe 1 or 2, at least one, on making sauerkraut in a crock, how I do it, slicing my cabbage very thin, layering it with coarse kosher salt, making a brine, getting a brine out of that, and then leaving it to leaving it to ferment. Why couldn't I think of the word ferment? Over a period of several weeks. In this case, I think I did almost 6 weeks probably. I left it in there. I like it really broken down. I don't think you can see, but it's a beautiful, beautiful amber color. It's the cabbage is very fine. It's broken down, all of the water has come out of it. And it's just a delicious product. And it's good to eat just as it is. But anyway, when I did this, my crock, that one crock that I had produced enough to make, here you see 7 quarts of sauerkraut plus some extra, which I love that because that's immediate gratification. I got enough to make several meals for my husband and I out of the sauerkraut right away, and the rest was canned and put away for another time. Now, of course, originally sauerkraut was not canned, it was just kept in that brine, but that's really difficult to do. You know, you get some air, we talked about that before in the video, you get some air introduced into that sauerkraut, you're going to get mold and stuff in there, and that's not really fun to deal with. So once it gets to the point that I want it to be my final product, I put it in a can. It stays like that forever. This will last a long time, and I don't mean because I don't use it, but I could keep this several years, and as long as it's still sealed, it's perfectly good. Just one, any canned product like that, vegetable, tomatoes, kind of things, when you open it, you want to make sure that the seal has always stayed and there's nothing funny about it. And be very, very careful, guard against botulism. I've never had it, don't know anybody's had. There's a lot of good instructions on the internet about how to can safely. I just want to say that. Be sure whatever you do, you can safely. And I want to tell you, this is my methods. What I'm talking about is what I do, but I want you to do what is comfortable for you. Anyway, so that sauerkraut is one thing. Of course, that came out of my garden. This is from cabbage that was made that we grew for the first time ever. It came out of a garden a couple months ago. We kept it in the refrigerator for a while until we were ready to can it, and then I made the sauerkraut, and then, like I said, that was maybe 6 weeks. So this cabbage has been long gone from the garden, but it's just now ready for storage. I want to say another way that my method is different from my mother's and grandmother's method is my grandmother and mother always, it was a big production, and they were always dealing with bushels of fruits or vegetables. Bushels, like when my grandmother had bushel of peaches, she would make peach jam, or when she had huge quantities. But we don't always have those quantities here. We have a small garden, and not everything that I can and preserve came from my own personal garden. And this is an example I want to show you. This is a jar of persimmon chutney. I had never had persimmon chutney before. A friend of mine brought me a bag of just a small bag of persimmons. She didn't want them. She didn't know what to do with them, and she said, "Well, maybe you want to do something with them." So I researched it, and I found a recipe for chutney, which looked very interesting, and I made it up, and it made 2 of these. This is a wide mouth, pint-sized jar, so I guess it's 2 pints plus a little more for tasting. And that's all it made. And this is how I did it. I canned it just in a smaller pan. I didn't use that big hot bath canner, water bath canner. I used just a pan big enough to hold how many jars I have. Okay. The important thing is you follow directions when you put it in. It's hot. The recipe is hot, and it goes in the sterilized jars, and then you bring that to a boil and you process it for how many minutes? This is probably, for this size, I usually do 10 minutes. Let it cool, undisturbed, and it's good. And I made, like I said, while I'm making dinner, the chutney's being canned, okay? Which, by the way, ended up to be very delicious. It's very spicy. It's a nice spicy, it's nice and spicy. It's really good. I'll share that recipe if anybody wants it. Okay, so anyway, my point is, that's one shortcut. by just doing small batches at a time while I'm doing other things. Other ways to do shortcuts are making up, like I have some salsas here and some pizza sauce and things like that. Those things, I'm dealing with 5 pounds of tomatoes at a time, minimum of 5 pounds of tomatoes. I'll talk about that in just 1 second. But anyway, that results in, for the salsa, it resulted in 4 pints, 4 of these, plus some for tasting, plus some, what I mean for tasting, like a partial jar, enough to, to enjoy right away. And that's an important part of the process for me, because when I enjoy it right away, by the time I go to put the label on to tell me about it, I have a chance to say something on that label, which again I'll talk about in just 1 second when we get to the actual recipe of the salsa. But anyway, canning 4 jars at a time. I had about 5.5 pounds of tomatoes in a large saucepan, which I could just put on and cook. I first of all did a shortcut with the tomato peeling, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. I had a shortcut there. I had a shortcut did on the stove to cook it down, get rid of some of the water. And then of course that pulp, I just kept that pan in the refrigerator, just waited until the following day when I had more time to can it. You don't have to do it all at once. But again, the important fact is that salsa had to come back up to a boil, get that up to a boil, get it hot, put it in sterilized jars, get it right in the water, boil it, can it, process it immediately. That's an important part of the process. You don't put a cold food in and try to process it. It has to be hot for things like tomatoes. Okay? And all this kind of information, and plus any of my recipes that I've used, I'm usually not real terrifically specific with my recipes, because I do usually tend to use what I have hand on hand, so it's more about the process than the actual recipe with me. But the recipes, what I did close enough that you can follow. I post these recipes on a blog that I have. This is a sister blog to birdinthecrone.com. This is thegoodwifesgarden.com. And I could put a link down here. And that blog is all about just recipes that I try out of things from my garden. What I do with the zucchini crop, it takes over the world, and what I do with the tomato crop, and other lessons that I sort of learned from my garden is just a little blog that I started a few years ago. I've fallen behind in it a bit, but I'm trying to get back up again because I do use it. I can't tell you how many times I've Googled myself to look for a recipe of something that I did a couple years ago, trying to try again with something from the garden. Okay, this is a good example of that. Okay, so now I just want to talk about some of the individual recipes here. Some of this represents jams. I do the same thing with jam. When somebody gives me fruit, like I did with the chutney, I'll make some jam, or sometimes, at this time of the year particularly, because I don't really grow much fruit, I do have citrus fruits here, but I don't really grow too many berries. I have a limited supply of blackberries, occasionally strawberries, but not enough to really can. But this is the time of the year, of course, when they're so affordable at the farmers market, and I love to support the local farmers markets. And so strawberries, like now, a big flat of strawberries, 3 big things, is like $5. So this time of year I buy those. I make some jam, and I also freeze the berries just whole. Freeze them for use in smoothies all winter long. So I usually get enough berries between the strawberries and the blueberries. I do the same thing with blueberries. Very affordable time of the year. Fresh, good, wonderful taste, and they freeze beautifully for use later in other recipes or smoothies, like I use them mostly, or making some jams. But here I have some regular. I entered a jam contest, which I'll write about. It was really silly, but I was making a strawberry margarita jam, and then I tried to be creative and make a sweet and sassy strawberry margarita jam, which had jalapeno in it as well. So it was little bit zippy, and my label indicates it's a party on toast. So I thought it was kind of funny. I don't know. It didn't win, by the way. It did not win. But it's very delicious. So I always have some jams. I'm always doing whatever kind of jam I can get a hold of. Because also we're chicken farmers. Remember, we always have good breakfast for breakfast, breakfast for lunch, breakfast for dinner. So there's always time for some jam to go along with the eggs. So, what else do I have? So, my big crops here represent from the garden right now at this point in time. Basically, we're talking about zucchini squash, which is in abundance. If you grow it, you have it, either have it or don't. It's never in between. So zucchini squash, cucumbers, same thing with cucumbers, and tomatoes. So a variety of tomatoes. And like I said, the one kind of tomatoes are just ending, but I'm still going to have some other tomatoes available for the next harvest to do it. So there's no way we can eat all of these things fresh. It's just no way, and it would be very wasteful, to not do something with it. But also, I have to say, there's just nothing better than taking some of these things, these garden tastes from your mouth, from your garden, directly from your garden, and processing it in some recipe, some favorite recipe, and enjoying those flavors in the dead of winter. It's just a delicious, wonderful thing. It's wonderful. There's nothing can replace it. So it's really worth the effort. But like I said, it doesn't take effort. It just takes knowledge, and it just takes a little bit of organization and the ability to know how you can break things up into steps. So you're just doing a little bit at a time. I'm a very busy person. I can't spend the day in the kitchen, and I'm not going to spend the day in the kitchen. That's nuts. But I will, you have to be in the kitchen to make dinner or whatever, or do the dishes or whatever you do. You can always be watching and pot on the stove at the same time in little steps, right? Okay, so just really quickly, I want to talk to you about some of the things that I have here. Let's talk about the zucchini first. One of my favorite things to make, if I can find it, is a zucchini relish. It's a sweet pickle relish. And I make this every year. Every year. I have about a dozen jars of it here. And I think that's about going to be it for this summer. But this will last me. This is really good. I have some in the refrigerator as well, so I have a little more than that. But it's very good on anything, but burgers and hot dogs, which are really lovely. But it's good on anything. It's really good to use in things like if you like it in tuna salad or chicken salad or that kind of thing, or just eat it with meats. But it makes really lovely gifts. People like it as a gift. And I've also used this in raffles. People have, it's a good seller. It's a good seller in something like a raffle. But anyway, this is delicious and very easy to make. The recipes on goodwifesgarden.com. So that's one of the uses for zucchini. I also make a sweet pickle, a zucchini sweet pickle. I don't have any right here at the time. I'm not sure if I'm making this year or not, but I'm not right now. But this year, I always make, I'm trying something for the first time, which I think is delicious. Here, and it's easy to make. This is bread and butter pickles, slices, with some onion in there. And that is made with Persian cucumbers. You see, I don't plant pickling cucumbers. My regular cucumbers are the ones that'll grow giant if you let them, that have the little tough, sort of a tough skin and the prickles on the outside that you have to scrub off. I really do love those for making relish, but also I use them for cutting into spears, making dill pickle spears, which these are refrigerator pickles. These are called mustard dills. I make a mustard and I make I have, I think, 2 recipes of dill pickles that I make that are just in the refrigerator. And these are very simple to make. They're good for just, when you have a few cucumbers, 1 or 2, fill a jar, cut it into spears, fill a jar, make a brine, pour it over, let it sit out for a couple of days, then refrigerate it, and it'll stay refrigerated for months. I have had it refrigerated and last for more than a year, and it still tasted good. I don't recommend that because I don't want to be sued if anybody gets poisoned and dies, but I've had no trouble. But I practice very good habits. I have very good habits, cleaning habits, cleanliness, making sure the jars are sterile, clean, and all the brine is good. But these are delicious. To just eat as they are, they're also delicious to use in things like one of the children, when my children were little, one of their, we ate a lot of food from the freezer, tuna pickle on hot dog bun, because I always had hot dog buns in their freezer for some reason, and a can of tuna and a chopped up dill pickle, little mayonnaise. That was lunch, and that they loved it, and my husband and I still love that, except maybe without the hot dog bun. We don't really do that anymore, but they're just wonderful to have on hand. So refrigerator, there's a lot of, again, refrigerator recipes that are really, really good. And they don't require a hot candy bath at all. They don't require that, so that's really lovely. Okay. Anyway, using the Persian cucumbers, I'm really excited about this because Persians, I still am going to have more Persians. They're wonderful to eat as they are, but they require no time at all. You slice these up, you salt them, you let them sit overnight, you try to get some of the extra juice out so that when you put it in the brine they crisp up again, and then you just can it, and that's done deal. It's a really quick thing. Little jars, again, you can use it in just a pan big enough to cover, so that you have water to cover the jar. That's all you need. That size. Okay. Now the last thing, we covered zucchinis, cucumbers. What I have here, I'm probably going to be making some dill. I also make some dill relish out of my zucchinis. Out of my cucumbers, which I still have to do. So, but that's just, that recipe, by the way, is up on thegoodwifegarden.com. I think all of these recipes are up there, pretty sure. Tomatoes, I usually have a variety of tomatoes. First of all, heirloom tomatoes. I always have an assortment of heirloom tomatoes, which I love. They are just sweet as anything. Most of them are very, very sweet tasting. I love them fresh. I have recipes in there for we use them on pizza, like on a grilled pizza particularly, which they're delicious. But for canning, I really like them to use a salsa. I make a salsa out of the volunteer tomatoes every year, and that's one of those things that when you taste it in the middle of winter, you remember the taste of the tomatoes you had that summer, because your tomatoes do taste different every year. Some years are really good and some have more flavor. Some years or you have a plethora of one kind of tomato over another, and it's reminded of that flavor, which I really love. Okay, so this year I think I had where's my heirloom salsa, and I do this in pints. Thank George. And my heirloom salsa this year had I had a lot of, I had green zebras, I had what else? Tie-dye, Brandywine, I think. I had a mortgage lifter. Oh, and I put some black cherry tomatoes in at the end, they're very sweet. So this ended up to be very nice and sweet, good spicy salsa. Oh, and I promised I would tell you about the method I used, and I do have it again on thegoodwifegarden.com, my blog. But it changed my life because nobody likes to peel tomatoes. Well, you cut the tomato, you put it in halves on a big baking sheet, you put it under the broiler for something like 10 minutes just to get them blackened on the top. Take them out of the oven, put a kitchen towel over top of them to steam them. It's to hold the steam in for about 10 more minutes. Take the towel off. Well, as soon as they're cool enough that you can touch them, you just pinch off the skin. It's like a miracle. And I have a picture of that on my blog. When you join it, it's so, in case you want to try it, it's really saves your life. But I just take my variety of tomatoes and put them on a big sheet tray and peel them, and then I just chop them up, juices and everything, stick them in a pot. Okay. Cook them down with the other ingredients that I add. Cook them down until it's the consistency you want, because some of the liquid's going to come up. Now this is what I want to talk to you about. It's a safety issue. when you're canning tomatoes, tomatoes have high acid content, so they're safe to can. That's why my mother could just can with a water bath canner, just her tomatoes very safely year after year, and no issues ever. She didn't have any problems. We didn't have any problems with botulism, right? As soon as you start making something like a salsa or a sauce or something like that, you're adding other ingredients. And it's very, very important that you keep the acid content high enough so that your recipe remains safe while it's in the jar, right? So I did a lot of research and looked around at what was recommended by, the health departments and the canning people and all kinds of people. And it seems to agree that there's a little bit of a ratio, a little math involved, a little bit, where your recipe should not contain less than 5 pounds of tomatoes. Let's say I use 5.5 pounds of tomatoes, I weigh them, which gives me about 7 cups of pulp and liquid, right? And I'm done. To that liquid, I'm going to add other things. In my case, I add onion, a little bit of onion. I add usually sometimes some garlic, or I will add peppers of some kind. This could be, sometimes I always use a combination. Because I grow them, and it's what I have. I might grow, I might have, one of the recipes had some bell peppers in it, plus jalapenos, serrano, that kind of thing. Some had guajillos, maybe a little poblano. Whatever I had, plus, 1 or 2 serranos, or I just had a handful of them. And in my case, I just made sure when I added the onion and the peppers chopped up, it did not exceed 1.5 cups. Okay. Oh, and cilantro, I usually put some chopped cilantro in there. So that stuff is non-acidic, so that should be less than 1.5 cups. The tomatoes should be at least, when you're done, about 7 cups at least of tomato pulp. Okay. But if you use 5.5 pounds, keep the liquid, everything, you're good. You're good, okay? Anyway, so then I add other things. So this is how I'm able to can safely, and I've been doing this for years, but I just want to say, I'm not recommending you do it. You always are safe in a pressure canner, but if you follow a recipe online, specifically like from the people that make the canning jars, or, the whatever, somebody who has authority, that you trust their authority. The people that make the canning jars, those recipes are tested, okay? And they're safe. So if you follow that you are safe. Okay? So anyway, I made these, what I want to talk to you about, and this was sweet and hot. And then the next batch I made, I ended up having some more tomatoes, and I made another batch. Looks the same, right? You can tell they're different because this I used a different ring just until I get the label on here. But this one, I used a lot more serranos, and I didn't use any bell pepper, and anyway, this ended up to be really hot. It's spicy and sweet. It's so delicious. That sweetness of the tomatoes, of the heirloom tomatoes comes through. It's just wonderful. And then as that heats, it's just really spicy. So this one is going to be labeled. That's why it's not labeled yet, because remember, the part that I saved and put in the refrigerator is the part that that's going to remind me, these have to be labeled. They're also going to say heirloom tomato salsa 2016, but these are going to say hot, because these, compared to this, is much, much hotter. So these jars have to have that. Okay. And one more thing that I do every year with tomatoes. Oh, by the way, the salsa. Then I also had a salsa that I made a volunteer. I call it volunteer salsa. Because every year, if you read my goodwifesgarden.com blog, any of the posts in there, you might notice that I always have volunteers. This is my favorite part of the gardening, because we make our own compost. We have our own compost pile, and that is what's spread in our gardens. And there's a lot of seeds and stuff in there. There would be, because you eat something, and you're always getting some volunteer of some kind out of the garden. Something volunteer, something we did not plant, specifically, but something that grew anyway. We get cantaloupe. That's something that grows very often. And I'd never have planted a cantaloupe plant ever, but we have 2 years in a row we had cantaloupes. And this year we have 2 tomato plants, and I think an eggplant. I'm not sure what else. Oh, and a pumpkin that we did not plant, that are just growing beautifully. And the volunteer tomatoes are the most prolific. They produce better than anything else in the garden. We've had so many of those, which I added a few of them. I love them specifically because they help thicken up. They're a little meatier tomato. They're not aroma, but they're a little meatier than some of the heirlooms. And when I made this salsa, it really was nice and thick. Not as sweet, but more tomatoey, more traditional salsa flavor. So that's a little different. So anyway, I call it volunteer salsa. And then out of those same tomatoes, I make something I always am canning. I make my own pizza sauce. We always make, and we call it pizza sauce because usually it's 4 pizzas. We make our own pizza all the time. But we bake it both in the oven on a pizza stone, and we also make it on the grill. But a pint jar of sauce gives us at least 2 pizzas, perhaps 3. But this sauce is also good for, we can use it on pasta, we can use it in, pasta dishes of any kind. It's just a basic tomato sauce. This year I put a little bit of spice in it that I don't necessarily always do, but this year I just felt like it. And again, but it's just basically tomatoes, little spice, little bit of onion. And in this case, I added a little bit of lemon, since I was adding onion and things to it. At the top of the jar, I just put a little bit of lemon juice, just at the very top, just to make sure that there was enough acid in there, okay? So anyway, this is just, I've talked a lot, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to show you what I do. I really recommend, if you have the time, if you're interested at all, to go to my blog and read when I talk about some of these things, to read, because some of the methods in there are really, I've found they're not my own, like the peeling of the tomatoes is wonderful. That's just a fun thing to do. Yes, it's a fun thing to do. So you don't have to peel them. I have left tomato peels in a lot of things in the past because I didn't want to bother peeling them. And there's nothing wrong with that, you can do that, but it makes for a really nicer salsa or a nicer sauce if you don't have the bits of tomato peeling. Sometimes they get a little leathery. But anyway, come back. I'm going to have a video in a couple days. My llamas, I'm getting my llamas altar finished up today, and I'm going to be doing a blog on that, on the bird and the crow, and I'll be sharing that, and probably I'll do another video on that. So, and I'd love to hear about you if you do any canning or preserving of yourselves. I'd love to hear how you share that. That's really fun. Okay, I hope this wasn't too dull for anybody. Fortunately, I don't do these very often. Anyway, again, thank you for coming to my channel. I'm Rebecca. I wish you blessings.